Good afternoon, everyone. It is really nice to be here. It's nice to see people kind of flowing into the lobby right now, and I'm glad you're interested in this topic. It's really relevant, and as the days go by, it gets even more relevant. So effective communication, looking at understanding high and low context exchanges in the workplace, and we're going to define some terms and figure out what I'm talking about here. You had a bit of an intro for me from Emma, and I'll just say that yes, academic lived experience, and then the last 13 years at ISANS delivering this specific program is just my background. That's why I'm here. That's why it's me here today. As we get going, for land acknowledgement, we acknowledge we are on the unceded traditional Mi'kmaq territory, and we're grateful for the peace and friendship treaties. At ISANS, as we work to settle newcomers to Nova Scotia, we honor and respect the Indigenous people of this land. It's worth bearing in mind that as we discuss immigrants, we discuss immigration, high and low context, communication, all of this. It's worth noting that many immigrants come to Canada with an Indigenous background in their home countries. They've got perspectives, they've got ideas, they've got experiences. So the idea and issue of indigeneity is not only of personal interest and importance to our people already in Canada, it's also of great impact to those who have more recently joined us and chosen to make Canada their home. So these acknowledgements are important as steps, but they're not the only steps we should be taking. And I certainly invite you to reflect on what your job is and how you do your job, and what it means to be doing that on lands that have been inhabited for, from what we can tell, at least 12,000 years, going back further in all likelihood. What does that mean for how we do our jobs and how we live our lives? How do we achieve a good blend with what we do and what's been on this land for so long? Okay, as a starting point, intercultural focus and your industry. There's a 9,000 plus engineers, plus those in training in Nova Scotia. Canada needed to fill 44,000 engineering jobs between 2020 and 2024 in 14 different fields. Demand for workers is increasing. Increases of female, immigrant, Indigenous, and other demographics are seen. Retirements are increasing. Despite progress in recent years, there are still extra barriers for internationally educated engineers. And all this is pointing to really getting a handle on the fact that retaining every new hire is becoming more important every year. We simply don't have enough newcomers into the field just by way of a birth rate to say, oh, we're fine. We have a shrinking workforce in many ways. We need to reach out in many new ways to bring in people who traditionally haven't been part of this sector, and it's becoming more important every year. And from as far as we can tell, looking out the calendar, that's going to continue. There's no stopping point. And the big piece here is with retaining, everyone leaves. Every one of us, everyone in the room today, we're all going to leave at some point. But we can also extend anybody's stay by being a little bit better about how we run our workplaces. Okay, so we're all going to leave, but how do we engage every person in the workforce, realizing that they may say, I want to leave in a year or 2 years or 5 years, and we can be thinking, let's make that 3 years or 7 years or 10 years if we can. Okay, because all those retentions add up. All right, so for immigrants, being an engineer in Canada can present challenges. There's a lot going on here, whether it's adapting to new regulations, understanding cultural nuance. Oops, where'd that go? These got out of order. That's funny. All right, navigating licensing, costs in energy and money, time, cultural nuances, lack of awareness of intercultural challenges among Canadian-born colleagues, and making mistakes about Canadian cultural expectations. All of these are challenges that quite often, if you're born and raised in Nova Scotia, in Canada, you've not thought about. And honestly, why would you? Why would you? Because you've been studying other things, you've been learning other things on the job, and you may have conversations, you may have given a little thought in this area, but if you haven't experienced it directly, there's no reason why you'd know all this. So the best way to proceed is to attend workshops like this and have conversations and expand your knowledge. Okay. So one of the things that I like to tell employers is that we're often we should assume that that people have positive intention. Assume that we're wanting to learn, wanting to know more, and for the most part, that's borne out. For the most part, we're proven true, we're proven right. And when we make those assumptions, we can then be a little bit easier on ourselves when we make mistakes. Okay, when we get things wrong, when we say things we shouldn't say, if we are positively intentioned, we make the mistake. We want it to be accepted. We want it to be not a big deal. We want to move on quickly and do the jobs that we are trained to do. Okay, so these pieces here, they are challenges, but they are easily overcomable, especially in workplaces where getting things wrong, making mistakes is part of the job, part of the deal. We want to minimize them, but we want to also accept when they occur that that's totally fine. Okay. All right, that's kind of our orientation. So for today, we are looking at culture and intercultural. We're going to look at some cultural aspects of dimensions, and we're going to look at high and low context communication. Okay. If people have questions they want to put in the chat while I'm talking, that's totally fine. Emma's on hand and she can flag things up if it's something that I can answer quickly. And I'll give you some moments at the end to ask questions in that way as well. Okay. So, shall we jump in? Are we ready? It looks like 129 in the room. I think it's a pretty good number. All right. So what does culture mean to you? We're going to start with that. It's pretty basic. And I just want to take 10 seconds and give you a moment to think about what culture means to you. Okay, if you want to add things in the chat box, you can, but we're just going to give it 10 seconds and just give it a little consideration to what culture means. Okay, what does culture mean to you? What is that giant thing that we're talking about here? Okay. Okay. And if we have anybody tapping in the chat box, we'll come to that in a moment, but I will keep on going. So culture, we have a couple things to consider, but the big part is culture really comes down to three big ideas here. It's our way of life. It's the lens we see the world through. It's how we interpret the world around us, and it's changing all the time. Okay, so people learn cultural ideas throughout their lives, helping us we understand the world. These ideas come from shared experiences. They help everyone make sense of new experiences. Culture varies based on social class, on age, on gender, on upbringing, on cultural traits. It is our way of life. If we were in Armenia right now, if we were in Madagascar right now, if we were broadcasting from Paraguay, we would be thinking, feeling, expressing things differently because we would have a different lens around us. Okay. So cultural knowledge is never complete. It's always evolving. Cultural ideas guide people in understanding the world, but they aren't enough to fully grasp new situations. So context is essential for proper understanding that. Interpreting the world, it's about the context of where we are. We can only truly know our culture by comparing it with other cultures. And the best way to do that is to find out about them. So we have a few people in the chat box there. I see those coming in. Please do open your chat box function and have a look at those. Okay, so we have shared beliefs, values, traditions, worldview. Excellent. Okay, thank you for those too. Okay, the last bit on this slide though is the fact that it's changing all the time. Okay, so if we think about what Halifax was 100 years ago, we think about what Halifax was 10 years ago. Think of what Digby was 100 years ago. We immediately have the sense that, oh yeah, it would have been different. It would have been something different because it's people. Culture is the people, and the people are different. The attitudes among the people form the culture, shape the culture, and pass on the culture. Okay, so we all have an incredibly active role in what culture is and what we expect around us. We're not passive. Actually, we are actually active in this, even if we don't realize we are. Okay. Okay, so we got culture. So how about cultural diversity? Okay. So a range of cultural expectations and experiences in a given location. Whatever the location is, we have a range of expectations, okay, and experiences. Okay. There's a lot in that. Okay. So cultural diversity is a comparison and an assessment among many ways of experiencing our perceptions. So we're comparing, contrasting, we're assessing. In our minds, we're thinking, I like this, I don't like this. I like that, I don't like that. What she said, I agree with. What he said, I agree with. Or the opposite. Okay? We're comparing and assessing. So we can get into how much we accept what other people are saying, how much we adopt what they're doing. But really, what we're talking when we talk about culture diversity, we're simply being aware of this thing that's all around us and kind of going, "Oh, that's interesting. I like that. I don't like that." Okay. And cultural diversity is comprising all the areas of diversity and the unique positioning of the ways that we live that diversity. Okay. The ways that we live it. So when we think about diversity on a regular basis, I've got employers in this job who will say, we want you to come in because we don't have much diversity here. I just want to flag this to you. We always have a good range of diversity in the room. I see 137 people in this room right now. There's an incredibly wide range of diversity in this room. So when employers are saying that thing to me, what they're thinking of almost always is we're very white. We don't have very many brown and black people or Asian people or Hispanic people or Latino. Like not indigenous. We look very similar in our skin tone, in our kind of in our how our faces look. That's one incredibly important area of diversity, but is by far not the only one. We have age, we have sexual orientation, we have religion, we have disabilities, we have whether or not we come from a family where there's education, university going back 4 or 5 generations, or whether we're the first person to go to community college. That's a huge difference right there. Diversity covers whether or not we have, whether we think in a really, really normal way, or whether we think in a really, really unusual way. Okay, whether we're normative or whatever it is. And as we get older, we change as well, right? As we move from 20s to 30s to 40s to 50s to 60s, the way we process information changes. That's also an element of diversity. Our hearing changes. Our sight changes. All these things are diversity. So when we're thinking about not having much diversity, we can think about a specific area that we may be more limited compared to others, and which we may want more. We might say we want a lot more folks from other countries because we are weak in this area and we're serving people from many, many nations. And actually, uh, ISANS last year served people from 184 nations. How is that possible? In Nova Scotia, there's only 195 in the United Nations. We have folks from all pockets of the globe in Nova Scotia, and we want to serve them. Okay. We have a question in here in the chat box. Are other countries in other areas of the world likewise seeking to increase whiteness? Well, South Africa was trying to do that for a while with apartheid. There are countries that are looking to increase certain parts of their population or decrease others. When we get the most extreme examples, that's called genocide. So there's lots and lots of ways to increase or decrease parts of our population. Okay, not sure if that's where you wanted to go with that, but countries are in fact doing all kinds of things which we can't control, and we can say we like that or we don't like that. Okay. All right. Moving to intercultural. Look at this, huh? Intercultural. So this is the experience of having a birth culture and an adopted culture. Okay, and the continuous adaptation between them. So that's a big deal, the continuous adaptation. When we change countries, when we move, immigrate from one national culture to another, we then are adapting at a tremendous rate. And when employers say to me, we're doing all these things to adapt to the newcomers and to help make our workplaces more comfortable, more respectful, but shouldn't they be adapting too? Absolutely, and they are. And as somebody who's been living outside his home country since 1995, I'll tell you that I've been adapting wherever I've been living. Everywhere I go, I'm adapting. Sometimes it's not that difficult. And honestly, I'm from the States, and living in Canada is not a huge change. There are differences, but when I lived in South Korea, that was a huge change. And I was exhausted on a regular basis, really tired, because it was so different. Okay? So, birth culture, adopted culture, and adaptation. And then just saying that this is the underlying expertise of ISANS. This is where I work. We provide to employers and communities. We understand because so many of us, and actually last I knew, staff-wise, we've got about 400-ish employees and 65 different nationalities. So we understand what it means to be living in a culture not of our own. So that intercultural expertise is what we're trying to help others understand more effectively. So Nogler in meeting chat says, by adapting to incoming cultures, are we not diluting Canadian culture to the point there is no distinct Canadian culture and Canada becomes a post-nation state? Well, arguably, ever since the first settlers arrived in Canada, we've been diluting the Indigenous culture. We've been making it weaker and weaker and weaker. So, yeah, there is that sense of making a culture into something else, but we've been over 400 years mixing and mixing and mixing cultures to create what we have today. The more we shift, the faster we bring people in, the faster the change occurs. And if we bring people in from nations where we didn't bring people in from before, then we have more of a mix from a wider variety of nations. Okay, so there's a lot to that of adapting, but when we talk about diluting a culture, well, actually, it depends what the culture is. If you take Poland, we could look at 2,000 years of migrations in and out of that territory, even at one point where there was no nation at all. And then there was a nation again. So it's a complicated piece of work to look at, but they are fascinating conversations as to what culture is, and are there places in the culture where we can say, this is the quintessential point where we had our culture, and then who gets to decide? So as you can tell, this topic has a lot of good stuff in it, huh? Okay, intercultural awareness. All right, so if our employer sees beyond our resume, who benefits? Okay, so immigrants bring experiences from other nations to our present location. When previous locations are far away, there's a greater chance of difference. These can be challenging, uncomfortable, or exhilarating, or all three. The differences may be the diversity of thought, the innovation, or that the employer is seeking. When we have different ways of thinking, this is diversity of thought. And diversity of thought really is innovation. It really is identifying new ways of blending perspectives to create something that we haven't seen before. So, intercultural awareness. Okay. We've got a full conversation going with a chat box here. The point of the question is that at some point, does there cease to be a Canadian culture, or will we merely become a Western or global culture? If we go back 600 years and say that was indigenous culture, that was still a range of people over the territory creating what the culture was. And if we look at all the immigration since then, we've defined Canada in a wide variety of different ways. And there's always a Canadian sense. There's always a sense of how Canada is different from Germany, or different from Russia, or different from Israel, or different from Argentina, or different from any other country. There's always a distinction. There may be a fear that we become too like them with globalization. And that is something that then people want to hold on to specific aspects of culture for a little bit longer. So what are the benefits here? So intercultural awareness, we have a more people-focused management style. We have more effective communication with employees, suppliers, partners, and customers. We have more effective recruitment and retention. And then leading to more time delivering actual products and services. So the more effective recruitment, that's what I focus on a lot when I talk to employers, but ultimately it's that next step, right? It's the next step. We get to deliver the thing that we're trained to deliver more. We're not spending all of our energies bringing somebody else on board. We're not lamenting the person who left our team with so many years experience because they were unhappy. We get to do more of what we love to do. We get to do more of that service that we bring to our customers. Okay. And I'll take this as the final question. Was the culture 600 years ago Canadian? Well, Canadian as defined by Indigenous people, right? As defined by those who lived here. And to an extent, some of them referred to Canada. Great questions. Thank you. Okay, so how does our nation of origin and its culture influence us in the workplace? Okay, we do this through cultural dimensions. All right, so get your brains ready. Culture can be seen through many cultural dimensions, and here are a few of them. So some dimensions are things like decision making, power distance, time orientation, and communication styles. These are four significant cultural dimensions where cultural differences can have a great impact on the workplace. Bear in mind that as with any dimension, both cultural differences and individual differences impact each interaction. Personality absolutely plays a role. Okay? It's not a question of culture or personality, but of culture and personality. And the personality was forged in the culture, but the personality may have been forged in a different culture coming to this culture. Okay? So we have absolutely a role for personalities and a role for the larger group around us into which these personalities are fitting to some degree. Right? It's always the teenagers that challenge the culture, that push the borders, that say, we're not doing it this way anymore, we're doing it that way. Teenagers have done this for decades and decades and decades, and probably forever. Oh, those darn teenagers riding horses rather than using oxen. Don't they know horses don't understand the soil as much? You know, there's always a change, there's always a push for culture to shift, especially among teenagers, even before they were called teenagers. Before that, they're probably called annoying adults. Okay. No, I've got teenagers in the house. I love them, and they push, and they do, and that's their job, and that's great. Okay, so we can identify cultural norms and recognize that individuals represent or are entirely different from those norms. If you have somebody from another culture in your workplace, and you know something about the culture they come from, you still can't assume they're going to be like that culture, because they've already been adapting to Canada. That person from Nigeria, that person from the Philippines, a person from India, they've already been adapting. So that thing you know about India, maybe it fits them, maybe it doesn't. We don't know until we talk to them. And that's where we can get ahead of stereotypes. Okay. So the decision making, we can talk about hierarchical approaches. We can talk about consensus-based approaches. When we think about power distance, the big piece here is this is the acceptance, okay? The acceptance of the relationship between the highest and lowest ranked members in the society. Do you feel it's okay for your chief executive to fly first class when no one else does? If you say yes, then you've got a different acceptance of power distance than the person who says, no, 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 we should all fly at the same level. Why should one person get more than another person? Should the chief executive get paid 5 times the amount of the lowest paid person? Or twice? Or 100? Your level of acceptance is how much power distance you accept. And that changes all around the world. Okay? Time orientation, expectations with punctuality and deadlines and work-life balance, polychronic time and monochronic time. The big piece here is, how important do you think following a clock is? Is it more important than a relationship? If you're heading for a meeting and a colleague who's in trouble, who's having a hard time, says, I just need 5 minutes, but it's going to make you 5 minutes late to the meeting, do you stop and say, of course, no problem? Or do you go to the meeting and you say, I've got a meeting, I've got to be there, I'm sorry, I can't do it now? What if it's 20 minutes? This is how much we believe relationships are more important than the clock, and how important it is for our culture for that as well. It's not about being late. It's about having a different priority. And finally, direct versus indirect and high versus low context. Okay? So these dimensions and these communication styles are really big pieces of what we're talking about in this territory. Okay, communication styles. We're going to do a little bit more on this because this is what I want to focus on the most. Okay, so direct and indirect. Okay, with direct communication styles, we look for honesty and frankness. We look for what you say is what you mean. We get people in our lives who say, "Hey, I mean what I say. I say what I mean. You know me. I just say it as it is." Okay, great. Okay, you are being direct. That is an established, clear, effective way of communicating for those who like direct communication. Okay, you're comfortable with disagreement. You like to engage face to face. It's typical of cultures that are individualistic and egalitarian. People who like more direct communication. So indirect communication, okay, subtlety implied with implied and contextual cues, nonverbal, deliberately vague, relationship focused, aware of face saving, conflict and tension to be avoided. Okay, if you have a conflict, you might even be looking to have it resolved by a third person rather than face to face. And is typical of cultures that are collective, more hierarchical, and class observant. Neither one of these is right or wrong. They fit circumstances in different ways, and some cultures vary indirect a lot more than direct, and vice versa. If you are the most direct person you know, then okay. Those who like directness are going to find you really, really refreshing, and those who like indirectness are going to find you a challenge. And then vice versa, too. Okay? Okay. And we often look for people who have similar styles. Okay, now let's look at high context and low context cultures. Okay. So the high context culture. Communication is sophisticated, nuanced, and layered. Messages are spoken and interpreted between the lines. Much is left unsaid. Shared experiences form the foundation of messages. Okay. With low context, communication is precise, simple, and clear. Messages are expressed and understood at face value. If it's unsaid, it's not relevant. Repetition or rephrasing clarifies the communication. So in high context cultures, there's a preference for indirect communication with a high value placed on relationships. Reliance on nonverbal cues, shared experiences, and implicit understanding to convey meaning in communication. Some classic examples of high context cultures are Japan, China, and many Middle Eastern countries. They focus on shared experiences. So we reference a shared event, a social ritual, a historic event, or a religious event. So for example, you go to a wedding and you might say to your friend, "Well, you know what happened last time he got married?" That's a shared context. You don't need to say what happened because you both remember it. Okay? That's a high context moment. The low context, direct and explicit communication or nonverbal cues are less significant. Communication leaves out acronyms. It leaves out idioms, slang, and other non-standard vocabulary. Okay? There's a strong emphasis on individualism and personal achievement. And low context countries are more like US, Canada, and many European nations. Okay? Okay, let's look at this a bit more of an example here. Excuse me. So, a high context situation. There's a shared history, there's shared understanding, there's among family and friends, there's nonverbal cues, nothing is written, there's unspoken rules. Okay, like in this picture. There's a lot going on here. They don't need to explain all the rules of how they're playing. They don't need to explain, there doesn't need to be a big explanation of why it's these two playing. Everyone kind of knows what's going on in this circumstance, right? Lots of unspoken rules going on. High context cultures rely heavily on implicit communication, nonverbal cues, shared understanding. All right, now let's look at the opposite, the low context. Okay, a wide range of backgrounds, differing relationships and length of engagement, maybe a business setting, maybe there's charts and bulleted information, explicit information and expectations. All these, it's explicit. Canada is a low context nation because we've been welcoming people from a variety of countries for 400 years. Welcoming being a relative term. Okay. Sometimes we welcome more than others. Some people we welcome more than others. Okay. If we're accustomed to people coming from a certain nation and then a different nation comes, that different nation, those people are going to have different expectations, and that creates waves. Some people may say this is exciting, and others may say I don't like this. Okay. But because we have 400 years of people coming from other nations all coming together, we've gotten very good at signposting, at explaining how to be Canadian. What is Canadian? Providing services for new Canadians. Many nations do not have an ISANS. They're not nearly as thoughtful about what it means to be welcoming someone into the culture. Okay? And the longer the same ethnographic group is in the nation, the more likely they are to rely on higher context situations and communication. Right? Okay, so let's check this out. Okay. So, it's raining? Yes. All right. Simple, right? Low context. It's small talk. Filler. The weather's noticed. They're just being polite. That's it. There's nothing else going on there. High context. We have all these pieces here. The weather's going to cancel our event. Taken us months to plan. We've lost a fortune. Our business is in trouble. We're going to need a new resource-rich partner. We'll have new challenges to overcome. All this is going on by saying, it's raining? Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay. So we are in higher and lower context situations all the time. And when we have people who join our organizations, they don't have that high context background. If you want them to be welcome, you need to find ways to provide lower context guidance. Okay, the signposting, right? Not using so many acronyms. One of the things, humorous here, I spent 10 years in England, and much of that time was with the police, and the police are, if anything, renowned for use of acronyms. They love acronyms, everything. And a friend, I was delivering diversity equity training, and train the trainer training, and a variety of other pieces in the training realm. And one of my colleagues and I just decided this is crazy. We're speaking like sentences with like 6 acronyms in them. So we said at our next team meeting we'd like to discuss the overuse of TLAs and how it's impeding our welcoming of new people into the workplace. So we got that on the agenda. Nobody questioned it. They went to us and said, "Okay, Paul, Dennis, what do you think? Well, what's with this TLAs and why is it a problem? Well, what is TLA?" We said a 3-letter acronym. Haha. Okay. So yeah, we sometimes get carried away. Low context does not use those acronyms, does not use the idioms as much, is more explicit about what is needed. Okay. All right. So, the impact of high and low context expectations on workplace culture. How's that, huh? We're only 35 minutes into the session and you're already at a slide like this. Well done. 147 of you are sitting here. Your brains are clearly on. All right. So, with decision making, high context cultures typically have a more consensus-based decision making approach, valuing group harmony and things like that. Low context cultures tend to lean towards individualistic decision making, focusing on goal attainment. Okay? Goal attainment. Power distance and hierarchy. Social status and hierarchy are often more important in high context cultures than low context. The distinction can affect interactions between employees and their colleagues or superiors. That power distance and hierarchy. So social status and hierarchy and high context, more important. Okay? My time in England, I was just stunned again and again by how often the class system was still in place, right? We kind of think, oh yeah, well, we're mostly beyond that. Actually, in North America, we really are. We really are. But there are still expectations. One of the guys I worked with was the admin for the program I worked for. 65-year-old man. I said, oh, you're doing admin? He said, oh, I've always done admin. My family's always been in service, so that's what we do. And he said service meaning not the service, not the armed services, but working for rich families in mansions in their service. It was a very class-based approach to getting a job. He's like, well, here's what my family does. Okay. And families that were in service tended to keep doing jobs that were in service. They didn't move up. They didn't become lawyers. They didn't become engineers. Okay. Okay. Communication styles. High context cultures often use indirect communication, relying heavily on nonverbal cues and shared context. So conversely, low context cultures value clear and direct communication. These differences can cause misunderstandings and miscommunication in the workplace. Okay. So our last area is not so much within the... Okay, I'll just get into it. Relationship building. We just want to do relationship building a little bit here. So high context cultures emphasize relationship building and trust. In contrast, low context cultures often prioritize task completion and efficiency. Okay, low context, task completion and efficiency. High context, much more about relationship building and trust. So, for example, employees from high context cultures might ask personal questions and about people's families. These are used to build trust, but may not be seen as appropriate by cultures that use different topics to build trust. Okay, so anything personal, anything that's deeply personal in a high context culture is more likely to be asked because they see it as a way to really get to the trust quickly. So, I mean, when I was in South Korea, regularly I was asked what my salary was. I was asked what I thought of Korean women as girlfriends. I was asked about family things like, and these are things that I would think, I barely know you. This does not feel appropriate in the least. Why would I comment on that? Because it's a different context culture than I was accustomed to. Okay. So think about all this with the impact on workplace culture. People have different ideas as to what are appropriate topics to use to gain trust. So if you're being asked for topics, you're being asked for information in areas where you think, oh my gosh, why would you ask that? It's not that they're being inappropriate. It's that they think they're being normal, and they're wondering why you are not reacting in a normal way. They're coming from a place where their questions are normal. Part of my own background is a bachelor's in cultural anthropology, and one of the things I got from that I really most appreciated was that every single culture in the world is internally logically consistent. Every culture, internally logically consistent. There are things that people might not like. They might go, this is awful, but there is a reason for it to evolve. They may not even know the reason. It may come from some other part of the culture they're not familiar with, but it came from something. And if we can expect that everybody around us thinks they're behaving in a way that makes sense, even if it doesn't make sense to us, we've got a better chance of stepping forward with compassion and understanding to go, oh, this doesn't make sense to me, but tell me a bit more about that. Tell me why you asked that question. Tell me what I can do to help you to understand this culture a bit better. Okay. Whew. A lot of stuff, isn't it? Okay. And as I said at the beginning, Amber kept her camera on so I can see that somebody's out there, and I'm not just talking into the void. So I see the smiles, and I appreciate that, and the nod, Okay. And my master's degree was in communication studies, so I look for those nods. I'll tell you, I look for that. If you're like frowning and shaking your head, I'm like, oh, I said something wrong. Okay. All right. So just to be aware that high context and low context, this is kind of a spectrum showing where cultures are in relation to each other. And in many of these cultural areas, these aspects, Canada is off on the end, as is the USA. USA is often a little bit further out than Canada and further out than any other culture that's been examined. USA is the outlier. Often Canada is too, and Australia. Okay? Then we kind of have Netherlands and Germany, Finland, Poland, UK. Kind of also, there's been a lot of immigration there. There's been a lot of shift over the years, maybe invasions over many years. Netherlands got invaded back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And they evolved a culture very comfortable with newcomers. Okay? And then we have countries in the middle, Italy, Spain, Brazil, France, Mexico. And then the high context over here, the China, Japan, Korea, Saudi Arabia, India, Kenya, and kind of France on kind of both that as well. Just to say, when we have folks coming from other countries, they're more likely to be high context than us. It's more likely because we're pretty far out there. If we were in Brazil right now, high and low context, people would be coming from both sides, and we'd be adapting in kind of both directions. Okay? So it's not that one is good or one is bad. They are purely high and low context in relation to each other. Okay? In relation to each other. Okay. Okay, so now here's a thought for you. Okay, so high and low context and personal communication. A good communicator looks different according to the preferences of low context and high context cultures because perceptions are in the beholder. Okay? So, low context culture value the explicit, the clear, the straightforward. Being too implicit or reading between the lines is often seen as untrustworthy. High context is values implicit, nuanced communication. Being too explicit can be seen as condescending or unnecessary. Okay. Perceptions in the beholder. Low context individuals may view high context communicators as secretive or untransparent. High context individuals may view low context communicators as condescending or overly explicit. And then the higher the education, I always find this fascinating, the higher the education, we have different outcomes. In low context cultures, education leads to a preference for clear, explicit communication. The more educated you are in a low context culture, the more you want the clear, explicit communication. And in a high context culture, more educated individuals are likely to communicate with a deeper understanding of implicit layered messages. Okay? So the more educated you are in a high context culture, the more subtle you are. The low context, the more direct you are. So clearly, this is not about being right or wrong. What suits your culture and your personality? And does your personality push back on your culture? Do you look at your culture and say, oh, God, all this low context, I hate it. I want high context. I want deepness. I want nuance. I want subtlety. Or vice versa. Okay. Oh, I got a little note from Nogler there. LT Nogler was still here. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Okay. So adaptability with low and high context is key. That's a key. Okay. To be effective in a wider range of higher and lower context individuals and settings, one must adapt the communication style to align with existing cultural expectations and norms. So adapting. This is the thing for immigrants. And immigrants, just because we're doing it doesn't mean we understand it. And I've been looking at this for years, and I'm still not thinking about it on a regular basis. I mean, talking to you, I am. But if I'm talking this to a neighbor, I'm not thinking high context, low context. I'm thinking about that on my own sometimes, kind of like, okay, how am I doing with this? And how are my interactions? Are they making sense? Am I the odd one out, or am I getting more normal? Okay. With flexibility, we want to understand and respect communication preferences of different cultures, recognizing it's crucial for successful cross-cultural interactions. Okay, so we can use these to our advantage. We can get better at what we do in our communication. Okay. Okay. The golden rule versus the platinum rule. We're winding up here, folks. Just a few more minutes to go. Okay. So there's that golden rule. Should be familiar to you. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Engage others in a caring and lovable way using your experience as a guide. You kind of look into yourself and you say, okay, is this something that makes me feel good? And if so, maybe it'll make somebody else feel good. Okay, it's a good intention. It's meant to engage in a loving way and to use our feelings of comfort and care as a way to guide our attention to others. We need to be tuned into ourselves to have a starting point for others. Okay? However, this assumes that people you talk to see the world the same way. Okay? While this has been created with good intention, it does not take into account cultural diversity. This can be misleading, okay, in multicultural contexts. It assumes everyone interprets the world around us in the same way. So what do we do? Well, there's a second half of the slide still to come. Bing, bing, bing. Look at this. Okay, it's a platinum rule. Milton Bennett, years ago, fellow who's big in the intercultural scene, many years ago, proposed a platinum rule. Do unto others the way they themselves would have done unto them. Okay. We can get to know people and find out what approaches work best for them. Okay. So we're respecting individuality and cultural differences. It's important to consider cultural differences, communication styles, and expectations while considering appropriate behaviors in any given situation. And how do we know what somebody else wants? We ask them, right? We ask them. We say, what would you like? All right. Okay, wrapping up here. I'll put this up here. I'll cover it in a moment. If you have questions and thoughts, please throw them in the chat box or put your hand up, and Emma will be very happy to moderate. We have a few steps we can do. I've got a second one step by step in just a moment, but we have 12 minutes before the very end, and I'm guessing if we wrap up with about 3 minutes to spare, people will appreciate that. Okay, so. Okay. What if I like this one? I'm sorry, I'm looking at it too. I'll start with
That's okay.
Constantine if I can. Okay. What if it goes against your principles, treating the other the way they want to? So I had somebody years ago who said he had somebody he worked with who kept talking about the multiple wives he had back home. And the guy that was talking said, this bothers me. I'm really bothered by this. I don't want this conversation. I don't want to pretend this is okay with me. This goes against what I feel is right. He says, do I have to like this guy? Do I have to agree with him? I said, of course not. We're asking that you respect the person as a human being. You don't need to like somebody. You don't need to agree with them. But we want respectful behaviors as a human being. Okay. When we say treating someone the way they want to be treated, well, are we talking about giving somebody 15 minutes to pray during the day? Are we talking about labeling food because they don't eat pork or they are gluten intolerant? I mean, we need to look at kind of what those things are that somebody is asking for, and then if it's against the law, then hey, I'm sorry, we can't do that. But we need to look more specifically at what it is somebody needs and what the organization can do, and what people feel okay providing. And that might be an offline conversation. I don't know, but if you want to give another example in there that's more specific, I could probably respond to it. I see M. McMenemy. How can I effectively bridge communication gaps between high context and low context team members to encourage collaboration and reduce misunderstandings? Whew, a good question. The big piece really is to start the communications with the fact that there may be communication gaps, and it may be in high context and low context. And look, you'll have access to a PDF of these slides later. So if any of this information is useful to get a conversation going about what is high context and low context, you can have a team meeting and say, I want to talk about this, and let's look at some of our expectations. But just opening up that conversation is a fabulous way to start having people solve the issues on their own. Quite often in this territory, we hear something and we go, oh, so that's what's been going on. I've been doing this for years and didn't know it had a name for it. Okay. Two chat box things. Anybody have another question?
We do still have time if people would like to add more questions to the chat.
Okay.
As a reminder, after this, I will be sending out a email with a survey to complete. But we still do have time left that your
Okay.
questions are welcome.
Okay. Chad Edison says, could you relate high context, low context to common leadership styles, democratic, authoritarian, servant, etc.? Uh, well, really, what we're looking for is if people are looking for, any, democratic, authoritarian, authoritarians can use high context just as well as somebody who's far, far more collaborative and much more democratic. So the high context is really we're really thinking about um, in-group communication versus bringing in people from outside. And authoritarians may have a tendency to want to say, here we are in this group, we are on this group, and if we can speak in a way and act in a way that serves to include those we want and exclude those we don't want, then that is using high and low context. Okay. And the same thing for democratic. If you're looking to bring in people through your communications that might ordinarily be excluded, then you're using a low context approach. As a Democrat, you might also, unwittingly especially, be using terms and phrases and expectations where you're limiting your audience. Okay? And servants and anybody else can do this too. If you want to reinforce the boundaries, you use high context. If you want to expand the boundaries, you use low context. I've never been asked that question before. Thank you. Do you think it is productive to tailor the environment to the types of tasks? For example, low context for technical execution, high context for creative design. Uh, it it kind of depends what you want as an outcome. If you want to really reinforce a team, like a team of five, working really, really tightly together for 6 months and really understand each other, that could be technical education or execution, or it could be creative design, right? Now, what do you want as your outcome? Do you want that super, super solid sense of here's who has done this work, or do you want to be a lot more ambiguous about what the boundaries are? But you could use any of those as a high context or low context intentionally. Okay, so LT Nogler has given me a whole lot more. Do you think it is reasonable to add the idea of cultural sensitivity to the culture of Canada? Cultural sensitivity. I myself have no trouble understanding that someone else's culture is different than mine and interacting with them in a way that includes their cultural sensitivities while meaning to my own culture. I found that many of these efforts demand the surrender of your own culture to embrace another. Okay, so I like that last sentence the most. Maybe it's something about me, I don't know. But that last sentence, people are worried about losing their culture. People are worried about some new piece coming in and not being allowed to or not being encouraged to have a part of their old culture. And ultimately, it is up to us which behaviors we choose, right? If you choose to always keep your shoes on in the house, regardless of what anybody else ever says, fine. Okay, that's your choice. If your choice is to have a steak every single day for dinner, regardless of the health studies that say you might not want to do that, you might want to vary your diet more, it's your choice. If you go to an event where all the options are hummus and tabbouleh and tzatziki sauce and whatever else, and you think, oh my God, where's my hamburger? Then you're probably going to shift and try to find events that have more hamburgers. Not to be blasé about it, but we really do choose what we want in our lives. And sometimes we find ourselves in situations where we are uncomfortable. And we can choose to either be in that discomfort or we can choose to leave it. And then there's a whole lot more to that. Um, the phrase "be less white," yeah, or be less black, or be less brown, or be less Asian. All these things have to do with how we see ourselves and how we fit into the environment around us. Okay. Michael Martin says, working in England right now, there are certainly subtle cultural dimensional differences between Nova Scotia and England. Absolutely, and they're fun to watch. Okay. Um, okay, and I'll say to LT and Nogler, if you want a conversation to continue, because you've asked a lot of things here, I'm happy to do that afterwards at any time you'd like. I will jump over here and look at the slide here. You've seen the slide for a moment there. Things we can do with recruitment, interviewing, onboarding, and retention. The other slide is another piece on how do we get to it. Uh, always more efficient pathways to licensure. Okay, because those pathways are sometimes challenging, to say the least. People-focused management style is very effective. Inclusive outreach or organizational support. Okay. Mentorship programs. I'm a big fan of mentorship or buddy systems for anybody joining the workforce. I think they are brilliant. If you ever want a conversation about those and how to set those up, let me know. But I think every employer should be offering a buddy or a mentor to every single new employee as a way of answering questions fast. Cultural benefits initiatives. There's some work in there. Professional development initiatives and respectful workplaces. Those are all steps we can take. Okay. Okay. Just to let you know that in fall 2025 we have a series of workshops that are coming out. Everyone's encouraged to try out our 3 core workshops. That's in the middle there. Then the ones outside that are more focused. And I can hopefully the PDF that I send you has a live link for the forums. If not, we can make that available. And thank you very much. If you have final comments there in the chat box or otherwise, I will hang out for as long as you want. But you are released as far as I'm concerned. But Emma may have the last word.
No, just a big thank you to you, Paul. It's a full session. And as always, a reminder that I will be sending an email with the survey to complete for your PD hour here. Thank you all for joining us. It was great. And as Paul said, if you would like to spec on, you can. I have a few minutes to keep this open, but I will be stopping the recording now. Thank you all.